All right, we're all set to go. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our in-person crowd and our our live stream viewers, and also to anyone who is viewing this after this evening, after August 31st. We expect there'll be some of you. We're going to give you directions. Every crowd will get their set of directions through this video tonight. We're just really thankful for everyone's dedication to serving vulnerable people here at James Street Mennonite Church. We're all committed to creating a safe church environment for everyone to belong here. I want to open with a prayer, a short prayer from Voices Together. And this is a prayer for learning communities, and I think that's us this evening. We're part of that. So let's pray. Come among us, Holy Spirit, and create a community of learning. Help us grow tonight in our wisdom and understanding, in our skills and strength, and in knowledge that honors you. Teach us, God, to know you, ourselves, our neighbors much more fully, and to see your presence here in this world more clearly, and to love more deeply with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Form us, Jesus, as doers of justice and lovers of mercy as we walk humbly with you and one another on this path of learning. We dedicate this evening, God, to you and to this future year of Sunday school, of Christian Ed, and of ushering. Thank you. Amen. I will need the clicker, yes, but I don't need it quite yet. I'll come back and get it after the video. Okay. Sorry, just getting ourselves together. This is the agenda for the training. We are going to watch a video. It's about 38 minutes long, and then we have some more specific information to our congregation, and then time for question and answer, and then we get to sign the documents and go home. We should be finished in about an hour. The video that we're watching this evening is a review video. If you participated in this same training a year ago or a year and 3 months ago, then you also saw this video. But we really thought two things. One, that it was significant enough to view again. It has such good information. It's presented pretty well. And secondly, I think we've all learned so many new things. I mean, if we've been doing this for a while, we've been learning new things every year. It's just good to go back and capture again what we've heard before, to just keep cementing the layers of information in our brains. So enjoy the video, and we'll come back after that. The next slide, I do want to go back to that slide about the Safe Church training after August 31st. So for those of you who are viewing this video after August 31st, I invite you to view the entire training video, and then there'll be special instructions for you given at the end of the training.
Yoder. I'm a speaker, counselor, and educator who's worked with youth for over 25 years. I have the privilege to serve on Dove's Nest Speakers Bureau. Dove's Nest, Faith Communities Keeping Children and Youth Safe, is a nonprofit organization that was started several years ago as a grassroots organization by a group of individuals wanting to prevent child abuse and neglect in faith communities. Our mission is equipping and empowering faith communities to keep children and youth safe in their homes, churches, and communities. We at Dove's Nest keep children safe by working with churches and organizations to create, implement, and follow protection policies and best practices. We also train adults and volunteers through in-person training and events and live video trainings and video recording like what we're doing right now. And we train kids and church leaders through the Circle of Grace curriculum and more. Thank you for working with children and youth and for investing in this training. Regularly talking about how to prevent abuse and maintain healthy boundaries is crucial for creating safe spaces for children in your community. This training is applicable to church, school, and camp settings, although many of our examples will be from churches. We often use the term faith community throughout this training to include the various settings you're coming from. We also want to name that there are victims and survivors among us, here and in every faith community. We invite you to consider how this training may affect you. If the material discussed becomes too sensitive or triggering, please feel empowered to step out or take a break so that you can identify the boundaries, self-care, and support from others that you might need. So let's get started. First, what does the Bible say about child protection? Matthew 18 tells us a lot about how to love children and about protection for children, as well as what we learn from children and why we need to protect them in their faith. In that chapter, Jesus' disciples ask him, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Then Jesus called a little child to him, and he placed the child among them, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Jesus doesn't say to the disciples, "Oh, we're all equal." Jesus actually brings a child into the conversation. And we know that at that time, the children's social status was only a little better than that of a slave. But Jesus loved them, and he elevated their status. Also, in Matthew 18:6, Jesus has incredibly harsh words for anyone who would harm a child. "If any of you puts a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believes in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea." Just like Jesus understood children's love and faith and humility, he elevated them. He also understood how easily they can be taken advantage of. Jesus' phrase, "little ones," in Matthew 18 is referring to children, according to the writer and advocate Victor Veith. The reference to a stumbling block could be a reference to any sin, but especially those sins that damage someone's faith. Victor says, Jesus is saying that anything we do to hurt a child's faith is viewed by God in the harshest possible terms. Some scholars assert that Jesus is especially condemning the sin of child sexual abuse in this biblical passage. Jesus didn't shy away from these topics. Child abuse has occurred during all time periods, the time of Jesus and today. The message is important for us to hear in church settings, especially since 93% of perpetrators describe themselves as religious. This is incredibly hard and painful, but it's also why you're here today watching this training. Jesus also modeled love and boundaries for all of us. He pushed against oppressive boundaries, but he never crossed or violated them. Touching women, healing on the Sabbath, relating to lepers are all examples of him pushing against societal and cultural boundaries. But his actions were about justice and not self-serving in any way. He pushed against boundaries that were oppressive and hurtful in order to bring forth justice, love, and healing. We at Dove's Nest are pro-church. We strongly believe that church and other faith communities can and should be the safest places for children, as they are our most precious resource, as Dove's Nest co-founder Jeanette Harder says. We're happy that you too believe that the church is a safe place where children can know that their entire selves are cared for by adults, but also by God. And that's important because faith communities, like churches, camps, and schools, offer so much for children and youth. You provide spiritual guidance, tangible services like meals and school supplies, social support, life skills education, lifespan celebrations, and leadership training and opportunities. Yes, it's hard to admit that often the biggest strengths are also weaknesses. Here's a list of strengths in faith communities that can also be weaknesses. The first one is trust. We often trust people in our faith communities, and that increases the risk of boundary crossing and abuse. Secondly, close relationships. How many times have you heard someone say, "We're like family here"? It's fantastic to have that kind of community, but let's also remember that families can have unhealthy patterns and secrets, and most abuse happens in family settings. Third is a hierarchy of power. The hierarchy of a church and organized leadership can also create issues when leadership doesn't respond to abuse or boundary crossings. It's a misuse of power to not respond appropriately. And then there's image. There can be emphasis on the faith community's image being the light of the world rather than being transparent about abuse. What about available people? Many churches and organizations, especially small ones, need people to teach Sunday school, children's church, or be youth group sponsors, camp counselors, chaperones. Faith communities are often desperate for volunteers. And there's forgiveness. Faith communities might focus on forgiveness instead of justice making, keeping individuals safe and holding accountable those who offend. Conflict avoidance. A lot of people want to avoid conflict. It's not fun. We don't want to make other people feel bad. And finally, sexuality. There's often significant discomfort or silence around sexuality and talk about our bodies in faith communities. Understanding the strengths and weaknesses in faith communities is the first step to address the complicated dynamics of child safety, boundaries, and abuse. This training video will go over 6 ways to make our faith communities safer. We'll learn more about child abuse, implement a child and youth protection policy, teach the Circle of Grace curriculum, report suspected abuse, understand social media, practice consent and healthy touch. Let's learn more about abuse. No denomination, faith group, or type of church is immune from the possibility of abuse. It's not a Catholic problem or a problem for conservative or liberals. All communities are at risk, although there are varying kinds of risks. Churches are especially at risk for sexual abuse. Let's not be paralyzed by the tragedy of child abuse, but rather be mobilized to make our faith communities the safest place for children and youth. So let's start by identifying each type of abuse so that nothing goes undetected. We often think about sexual abuse first. Faith communities are uniquely vulnerable to sexual abuse because members are close like family, as we've mentioned before. We trust each other and welcome guests. But these positive characteristics also can put kids at risk. Sexual abuse may be one of the most unreported types of abuse, and it is actually the most prevalent in churches. A second type of abuse is physical abuse. We want to keep a helpful eye for all children who might be physically abused, not only in our churches, but in our neighborhoods and communities. In particular, we need to make sure that children are not physically disciplined within our faith communities. A third type of abuse is neglect. It's the most prevalent form of abuse, accounting for over half of the children who experience abuse. Over half the children also who die from abuse have experienced neglect. What is neglect? It's not when we accidentally send our children to school without a coat or lunch money, or when we can't buy our kids name brand clothes or shoes. Neglect is when a child is at home or in a car without supervision for long periods of time, or when caregivers don't provide basic needs like food or diapers for their children, or when they fail to get their children medical treatment when they are sick or injured. And then there's emotional abuse, when a child is verbally degraded by a person who calls them names, swears at them, or ignores them. Emotional abuse can accompany other types of abuse or neglect. Like the other forms of abuse, emotional abuse is hard to detect. You can't touch it or visibly see it. So as leaders, how do you know if a child is being harmed? The best way to know if children are being abused or neglected is to watch for significant changes in behavior, like suddenly becoming more aggressive or withdrawn, or a significant change in academic performance, or regressing to an earlier developmental stage. When you see these signs, be alert, ask questions, and get involved. While there is risk for children of all ages, children the most vulnerable to sexual abuse are between the ages of 7 and 13. At Dove's Nest, we don't emphasize numbers or statistics on abuse because they can vary and only tell part of the story, but those statistics are important for us to be aware of. Every faith community has victims and survivors who are part of their fellowship. Sadly, we can assume that offenders are also part of our faith communities too. He or she may not be a registered sex offender, but they are among us because few offenders get caught. If we ignore this reality, children are at high risk for being hurt. We must accept the reality that child abuse happens, and probably not the way you'd want to believe. You see, 90% of offenders are known by the child. It may be a parent, relative, caregiver, a family friend, or someone else. So let's dispel the myth of stranger danger. An offender usually isn't the creepy guy at the park. It's more likely to be someone who is known, loved, and trusted by the child and the family. So it's important that faith communities have the same standards for those who work with kids, not embracing a stereotype for an offender. An offender can be a man or woman of any age, education level, race, or socioeconomic status. Also, having different standards of clearances and training for adult volunteers based on certain qualities, like how long we've known someone or what kind of experience they have, can get complicated, confusing, and isn't effective or fair. Let's talk about what to look for in offenders. The act of grooming is how offenders manipulate and build trust with their victims so they can abuse them. An offender often takes months, even years, gaining the trust of a child, parents, and often the whole faith community. As time goes on, they may begin showing special favors to a child or begin to find ways to be alone with the child. One reason that boundaries are so important is that offenders will often use the same kind of touch that non-offenders use to groom children, and it becomes very confusing to a child. Here are just a few signs of grooming. Appearing especially preoccupied with one child, insisting on being physical with a child, trying to be alone with a child, making inappropriate comments about a child's look or body, secrecy or lying. Being bullied or bullying others are traits that predators actually look for in children. A pattern or combination of these behaviors are those to be concerned about. However, the behaviors should not keep us from interacting with children. Kids need our love and attention. They need us to care for them and to interact with them in healthy ways. So how can we show kids that we care without touching them? We can show them through conversation and interacting with them in public places. We want to empower you to interact with kids in healthy ways, feeling confident that you aren't crossing boundaries. Okay. Let's talk more about the perpetrator. He or she can be an adult, a teen, or another child. Child-on-child or peer-on-peer abuse is when both the one experiencing the harm and the one doing the harm are under 18, and there is an imbalance of power among them. More than 30% of abuse is committed by kids under 18. It's important to keep this in mind when thinking about potential offenders and the myth of stranger danger. Dove's Nest is learning more and more about peer-on-peer abuse, and unfortunately, more faith communities are being confronted with it. There are different types of dynamics when dealing with minors rather than adult perpetrators. For example, many children may be sexually acting out pornography that they're exposed to. In fact, age 11 is the average age kids come across porn. So youth should not be labeled mini abusers. If the offense is addressed with safety plans and professionals, the child may be rehabilitated and the situation restored. There is hope. And yet, the damaging consequences to the victim are very real. So let's not minimize that. It's important to understand what's considered normal sexual behavior among kids so we can identify what is appropriate, inappropriate, harmful, and abusive in home, school, and church settings. Normal behaviors include curiosity that is limited, intermittent, lighthearted, and spontaneous. Problematic, or what we would call yellow light behaviors, can include exploration that is different from the child's peers. It increases over time, and it's something that the child is unable to stop. There can also be efforts to bribe or coerce children who are younger or more vulnerable. At this point, it is important that parents speak up and do something so that a safety plan and preventative measures are put in place. Sexually abusive, or what we'd call red light behaviors, are even more extreme and can include sexual behavior that is frequent, pervasive, and compulsive. It can also include types of force, manipulation, and threats, as well as provocative behavior towards adults. This is where professional intervention is absolutely needed. With all of these issues, agencies in your community can help you learn about child abuse, what to watch for, and how to report suspected child abuse. We urge you to get to know the child protection organizations in your community before you have a crisis. Build relationships with them. Talk with social workers or counselors and police in your community. If you need crisis intervention or are working with a sexual offender in your faith community, it's important to seek outside counsel. Like reporting, this is not something a faith community can usually figure out or should figure out on their own. Let's talk now about implementing, following, and regularly reviewing your child and youth protection policy. You may wonder, why do we need a protection policy at our church or organization? Well, a policy is a tangible sign of a faith community's commitment to child and youth safety. It provides common definitions as well as expectations and guidelines for appropriate behavior. It communicates that children and youth are valued. Just having a policy is a deterrent to offenders. They may see the policy and realize how hard it's going to be to have access to a child in a community that really protects them. A visible policy also signals to parents that the organization takes safety and protection seriously. That's very attractive to many parents these days. Can you think of other reasons? Jot them down. We at Dove's Nest celebrate that many churches, schools, and camps we work with now have written child protection policies. They are important to keep everyone unified regarding proper behavior and protocols, especially when faced with a tough situation. Child abuse catches organizations by surprise. It never comes at a convenient time, and it never feels good. A policy is important not only to prevent child abuse, but to navigate the times when we don't know what to do. If you don't have a policy or you need to update yours, please contact Dove's Nest website for resources. Go to www.dovesnest.net/policies. Now I want to talk to you about Circle of Grace. The Circle of Grace curriculum is most often used in Christian schools or in Sunday schools, and it's an important tool for empowering children. It should be used after creating a child protection policy and training adults. Dove's Nest believes it's the adult's responsibility to keep kids safe through protection policies, training, bystander intervention, and general education on abuse prevention. It's not up to children. So let me tell you a little bit more about Circle of Grace. It's a Christian curriculum on healthy boundaries and abuse prevention that educates children and youth about the value of positive relationships with God and others. It's a comprehensive pre-kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum designed to fit any Christian education program. It has 1 to 4 lessons per grade and can be done in less than a month. It's best taught yearly and can be done in many settings. and is available in Spanish and English. Circle of Grace is developmentally appropriate and empowers kids to identify and maintain appropriate physical, emotional, spiritual, and sexual boundaries. The Archdiocese of Omaha developed the curriculum, and Dove's Nest offers a Protestant version for churches, schools, and camps. We want kids to know that God and adults in the faith community care about their well-being and that their bodies are respected. Circle of Grace helps children identify potential violations by listening to their gut and the Holy Spirit so that they can seek help before they're harmed. Here's a brief overview of what the curriculum includes. God helps children know what belongs or doesn't belong in their circle of grace. A child recognizes an uncomfortable feeling through a funny feeling that is in their gut. And then he or she realizes that this may be the Holy Spirit's prompting. And then they seek help from a trusted adult. Finally, Circle of Grace enables Sunday school teachers and youth leaders to demonstrate that no topic is off limits. One time, a friend told me a story. A child started telling her about something that they had seen on TV that made the child feel uncomfortable. When they used the word sex, another child elbowed them and said, "We don't talk about that in church." My friend was able to reinforce that they could talk with her about anything because their faith community cares about all parts of their lives. Circle of Grace gave them a common language. So go to www.dovesnest.net/Circle of Grace for your copy of the curriculum, or if you have any questions. We also have a teacher training video for Circle of Grace available with more information on the website. Now, I need to talk to you about reporting any suspected child abuse. Any and all suspected abuse needs to be reported to your local authorities. Follow your church or organization's policy regarding this. When hearing a child tell about abuse, first of all, believe them. You may be the only person that that child discloses to. How you respond has a big effect on how the child heals from the abuse. If you shut them down, or perhaps he or she will never share again. Remember to listen and avoid giving advice, making promises, or making assumptions. Also, don't interrogate or ask leading questions or ask for details. Instead, limit the questions to the following. What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Who did it? And how do you know them? As a person hearing about the abuse, you don't need proof or evidence. If you have suspicion, or a child discloses, or you observe disturbing patterns, you must report. All of your identifying information will be kept confidential. While false reports have happened, they are very rare, and they often indicate there is something else that is going on that needs addressed by a faith community. Perhaps past abuse, or something going on in the child's life that needs attention. Dove's Nest recommends that everyone act as a mandated reporter, regardless of your profession or what state you live in. After you've made the report, contact the pastoral team or someone in your church's Safe Church Committee if you have one, or reach out to another organizational leader. Here's where you'll need to follow your organization's child protection policy. Also, childhelp.org and the National Hotline is a resource you can utilize while reporting child abuse. Dove's Nest is also a resource for your faith community's leadership. Let's talk about social media safety. Tackling the challenges of technology and social media is hard. It's constantly changing, and adults may often feel like we can't keep up. But tech is here to stay, so we need to find safe ways to make it work for us and our faith communities. Safety really starts at home, making sure that those of you who are parents have open communication with your teens about what they're doing online, in their gaming, in their conversations. You can't monitor every move, but you can help them set boundaries. One example might be for everyone in the family putting their phones in the kitchen at nighttime, with you as parents being the models doing that. As I said earlier, when it comes to tech, such as how you communicate with your youth group, Facebook pages, group texts, they're here to stay. Many youth leaders use these technologies to communicate with kids. It's become normal for us. While we at Dove's Nest are not the expert on social media safety, we can have some best practices for you to think about for your faith communities. Here are a few. Limit one-to-one electronic communication. Just like we avoid one-on-one connection with kids in real life, we want to follow the same two-adult rule in technology. Also, copy parents or other adults on emails or text messages. Keep parents apprised of what's going on or phone conversations that are happening with youth. Communication should be traceable, which also protects you. Also, consider whether you should friend a child or youth that you're working with on social media. Some camps have guidelines about when counselors can friend campers. Similar guidelines often apply to teachers and students. When you're in doubt whether you should friend a child or not, probably don't. Nothing is confidential. This is something kids need to know also. And talk with other adults you're working with when you have questions. So now we're going to talk about healthy touch and consent. We all want children to know that they are made in the image and likeness of God, and that sexuality is a gift. We can model respect for their bodies by not touching someone without their permission, by not objectifying others, and by calling out unfairness when people are objectified. We as adults can model by using positive language, boundary words, and reinforcing boundaries between kids. In addition, it would be great if we as adults could model consent better for kids. Examples of this are asking permission before laying hands on someone for prayer, or giving opt-out options for intimate rituals like foot washing, or different ways of accepting an anointing. Practicing consent as adults is important too, so we as grown-ups should also ask before giving a hug. Trust your instincts concerning consent. If you have doubts, listen to them. Your body often knows what your head hasn't quite yet figured out. Talk to a faith community leader or other resource person when you have concerns about someone who isn't respecting boundaries of kids or other adults. We as adults should speak up if something is odd or feels off. The Circle of Grace curriculum helps children do all of this by paying attention to their gut feelings and seeking help. Adults need to do that as well. People of all ages should talk about and practice consent. So you might be wondering, what really is consent? First, consent is a clear yes, not an absence of no. Second is voluntary and should be verbal. It's always best to ask children of all ages, do you want a hug? Third, consent is a process and conversation. For example, I see you're tickling him, but he's saying stop. Even if he's laughing, he is saying stop. Or, can you hear that? Are you in his circle of grace? This doesn't look like a safe touch. Or, more generally, he looks like he could use some space right now. Let's everyone just take one step back and make sure to respect each other's personal space. Finally, consent can always be withdrawn. It's not fair to say to a child, oh, but you gave me a hug last Sunday, why not today? Or, I thought you liked to sit with me in church. A child's verbal or nonverbal no should always be respected. Another friend of mine was volunteering as the second adult in her nursery. And while she was sitting on the floor with her daughter, her daughter hugged her. And another little girl was looking a bit sad, looking over at them. And so my friend said to the little girl, would you like a hug too? My friend tried to keep her hands back so it wasn't pressuring her. She said, no, I don't. My friend was so glad that she asked because she made the wrong assumption about the young girl and what she needed and wanted. Now, let's look at healthy touch, unhealthy touch, and confusing touch. Healthy touch. Children need love, encouragement, both physical and emotional safety. Healthy touch is in response to a child's need for comfort, encouragement, or affection. It should not be based on an adult's emotional need. Babies and toddlers need physical touch. Being held and cared for are things that they innately need. For older children, Offer the option of high fives, side hugs, pats on the shoulder, or fist bumps. Perhaps you have friends and family members who insist on touching your children. For them, you can say, we have a family rule that our son doesn't have to hug or kiss, or even high five someone if he doesn't want to. Prior to touch, though, engaging in conversation is probably the best way to make kids feel appreciated. A study shows that the number one thing youth want from church is someone who listens to them and talks with them in a caring way. So let's look at what is considered unhealthy touch. Unhealthy touch makes the receiver feel bad about himself or herself. It's received as painful, manipulative, coercive, abusive, or frightening. Of course, we want to avoid all kinds of unhealthy bad touch. Unhealthy touch can be abusive and needs to be reported. Or it can be unwanted touch that should be intervened and corrected. Also in this category, we need to instruct everyone working with kids that no type of physical discipline, like hitting or spanking, is ever permitted. And then there's the confusing touch. Confusing touch makes the receiver feel uneasy, confused, or unsure. They'll have conflicting feelings about the touch or the person doing the touching. A lot of touch is confusing, especially for older kids. Puberty makes so many things feel awkward. The receiver might experience conflicting feelings about the touch or the person doing the touching. Sometimes adults will reach out and touch kids or put their arms around them or scoop them up or give them a hug or a kiss. It could be harmful or it could simply be awkward and not age appropriate. I've heard youth groups say, we're a huggy group. What does that mean for someone who doesn't want to be hugged? We pressure people to touch or be touched more than we realize. We need to make sure that we don't send the message that here in church or elsewhere, we're nice and not rude. Rather, we need to respect children and youth when they don't want to be touched or touch someone else. Many of the kids who show indiscriminate friendliness are also the ones who need kind and unhealthy boundaries the most. We don't sit on laps during circle time, but I'd love for you to sit beside me as someone with something that you can say to a child who wants to crawl into your lap. While talking about physical touch, it's important that we also talk about power. This includes male-female dynamics, age dynamics, group pressure, and Jesus' vision of mutual love and serving relationships. Some reminders for all of us. Power is not about if you feel powerful or not. Power is neutral and objective. You have power if you're older, bigger, stronger, have normal development. If you're sober, all of those things give you power over an adult or child who does not. If you have more power, your obligations around consent are different. Here's an example of touch guidelines from one faith community. The first one is that appropriate touch should be a response to the child's need for comfort, encouragement, or affection. It should not be based on the adult's emotional needs. Their second one is to never force affection on any child. Physical contact should always be with the child's consent. For example, the approved adult may ask, "May I give you a hug?" The third one is that physical touch should generally be limited to hugs and contact with the child's hand, shoulder, or upper back. A child's verbal or nonverbal no should always be respected. At no time should a child or youth, even if fully clothed, be touched on or near the breasts, genitals, or buttocks. Physical touch should be appropriate for the age of the child or youth. For example, while it is often appropriate to hold a toddler on your lap, it is inappropriate for a teenager to sit on the lap of an adult. For older youth, they could opt for a side hug or other form of affection that does not involve excessive contact. Physical affection toward a child or youth should occur while another adult is present, and corporal punishment is never permitted. Finally, I want to go over some general ways to be more safe. First, decrease isolation and secrecy. Increase supervision and accountability. All activities should be observable and interruptible. Provide education on personal, emotional, and physical boundaries and on appropriate touch. Finally, follow the two-adult rule. It's important for one adult never to be alone with a child. It's also best to avoid one adult with multiple children, although that's better than one-on-one. We recommend 2 approved adults in every activity for children or youth. Thank you for participating in this training. We are so grateful that you're working with kids, either as paid staff or volunteers. The time, energy, and resources you give go a long way for the lives of kids. Please don't underestimate that. So to recap, in this training, we went over learning more about child abuse, implementing a child and youth protection policy, teaching the Circle of Grace curriculum, reporting suspected child abuse, understanding social media, practicing consent, and healthy touch. If you have any questions about these areas, please contact Dove's Nest or visit our website. If you have questions about your church's or your organization's policy, contact your leadership. To close, I invite you to join me in the Circle of Grace meditation. The concept in this meditation is simple, but so powerful. If possible, let's stand up and do it together. It gets us moving, and it acknowledges our bodies and the space around them. So raise your hands above your head, then bring your arms slowly down. Keep them outstretched. Extend your arms in front of you and then behind you. Know that God is in the space with you. Slowly reach down to your feet. This is your circle of grace. You are in it. Dove's Nest is supported by donors. If this video or the resources on our website are helpful, please consider a gift so we can continue to keep kids safe and offer services at a low cost so that all faith communities can have access to what we have to offer. Thank you for being a part of this training today. Your work with children and youth is so important and will have lifelong effects as you teach, model, and care for children with healthy boundaries.
So for anyone who doesn't know, my name is Alicia, and I'm the Minister of Youth here at James Street. So I'm going to talk about some of the more youth-specific parts of our child protection policy here at James Street. All right, can we go to the next slide? This is apparently not working. So one of the main things that's different with youth than children is our mentoring program. So generally, the 2-person standard that was talked about in the video applies to interactions with youth just like with children, which means that there needs to be 2 approved adults at all youth events and whenever adults are interacting with youth in the church. But in the mentoring program that we have, youth are paired with a trusted adult that is met with by the youth and their parents ahead of time and decided on together. And so the mentors are really there to be another caring and committed presence in the life of a youth. And as they build a friendship with them, to be someone that youth can confide in and just really walk with in the journeys of life and faith. And so because of this relationship, mentors and their mentees sometimes will do activities and get together one-on-one. And so this is the exception to the 2-person standard, which again is agreed to ahead of time when the mentors are decided on. So that's understood by the parents. But since we are aware of the extra risk that this introduces, our child protection policy states that one-on-one meetings should always happen in a public place and at like a reasonable time of day, so not like late in the evening. And we also encourage mentor pairs to do activities with other mentor pairs so that there are 2 adults then in that situation when that can work out. Mentors are also reminded that they should not try to offer professional counseling of any kind. If they notice a potential need for this in their mentee, they can reach out to the pastors for a referral to a professional to help in whatever way they need. And along a similar line, as we are talking about the importance of reporting any suspected abuse, mentors should be especially aware that as they are building a close relationship with their mentee, it becomes more likely that their mentee may share some very personal things, and that this could even include possible abuse. And so this is why it's so important for us to be aware and know how to report those things. And as we're also thinking about things that youth may confide in us that we need to tell someone else about, it's also important to pay attention to any mention of self-harming. Because while this isn't something that we are technically federally mandated to report, it is something that's important to be addressed, and so should be shared with parents, can be brought to myself or Carmen or Stan, and we can discern together the best way to address that and care for our youth. And so while this is all some pretty heavy stuff, we shouldn't let it prevent us from investing in the lives of youth, because it's so important that young people have adults who they can trust and relate to. And so it just means that we need to be extra aware of what we can do to ensure their safety. We can go to the next slide. And now I just want to touch briefly on some digital communication things. Some of this was also talked about in the video. But like they said, our world is just becoming more and more digital, especially since the pandemic. And so communication is, of course, important and necessary. But when it comes to digital communication with youth, it's best to avoid the one-on-one digital communication similar to our two-person standard. And so if you as an adult are initiating online communication with a youth, it's best to copy their parents on that. And for communication online, sort of to be limited to more logistical things of when you're going to meet up or briefly checking in with your youth maybe throughout the week, but saving more personal conversations for talking in person. And we can go to the next slide when we are ready. And then also using a traceable method is important. So something like emailing or texting, but avoiding social media, specifically things like Snapchat, which is an app that lets you send pictures that are then erased soon after they are received. And it's also best for mentors to just ask and talk with parents at the front end of the relationship to talk about when and how communication is best and what kind of methods they would prefer. This can just help to build trust and make things smoother for everyone as you go. Caring for and building relationships with children and youth is a privilege and a responsibility that we should engage in joyfully and take seriously, as we have the opportunity to reflect God's love to our young people and to help them to understand their worth and to make decisions about what they believe and how they want to live. Talking about and following these policies is one way that we show the value that we place on shepherding our young people well.
In addition to talking about child abuse and how we work with kids, we feel it's also important at James Street to provide a safe place for people to come and to worship. So as administrator, part of my responsibility is making sure that we have plans in place to deal with if there should be things like fires, or if there would be like a tornado or something like that weather-wise happen while we're here. Or intruders and that kind of thing. So we're going to talk a little bit now about some emergency plans that we have in place. When you came in, you should have received a piece of paper that has our policy on it. Those of you who are watching the live stream, it was included with the documents that were sent to you. So you can have that to refer to. All right, you can change slides. We're not going to cover everything tonight on this white paper. I want you to take the time to read over it, but we're going to hit just some of the highlights. In every room in the church, there should be diagrams posted with exit instructions. So should there be the need to evacuate, it says you are here and this is the door that you need to go to. We are not to use elevators if there would be an emergency. The steps at the rear of the sanctuary here are not to be used, but you should use the steps at the main stairwell if you're in the balcony. So we don't want to use these steps at the back. All right, go to the next one. We also put into place a policy last year where we developed our go bags. So there's one of these in every children's classroom, and in it there would be a few things that the teachers would need if there would be an emergency. There is a roster with all of the kids in grades preschool through grade 5, because we do move the children around from room to room, and that way whatever class you're helping with, you can just look at that age group and know who's potentially on your roster. And so the first thing that you're going to do is in your go bag, there's your roster. You want to get your kids together. There's a rope in each one. What we encourage them to do is there's 2 persons. You'll have an adult at each end and encourage the kids to grab a hold of this. That way you're all going out as a group. It can be very frightening for kids when there's alarms going off, and if there would be a fire, you would see smoke. The teacher's job is to evacuate their classes as quickly and calmly as you can. Go ahead and flip. It's really hard for parents, but if you're here as a parent, we do not want parents to go looking for children. It's the responsibility of the teachers, and the ushers are prepared to assist with the nursery and preschool classes, because with them, some of them might not be able to walk. There might be a little bit more fear going on there. So parents, we urge you to exit the church, depending on what room you're in, find the nearest exit, and trust that the teachers will evacuate the children. All right, go ahead. So when the children are taken outside, they're going to go to Tim is at the north end of the parking lot, down toward the Lancaster Arts Hotel. There's a grassy area. So you want to take your group holding on to that rope as far down here at the bottom of the parking lot as you can. And when you get there, you're going to take your roster again and double check. And if all your kids are accounted for, you're going to hold up a green sign. If all of your children are not accounted for, so perhaps maybe on the way out, somebody let go of the rope. And if it's really smoky or something like that, maybe weren't seen. If you realize that somebody is missing, you're going to hold up a red one. And we need to make sure that everybody is on green to know that everybody's accounted for. If somebody has a red card, that means we need to alert the emergency personnel that there's somebody who's not accounted for. Okay? So those bags have some important goodies, though very simple, but hopefully help you keep organized and calm if there would be an emergency. And then once everybody's accounted for, then the children can be released to their parents. All right. Now, there are a couple of other concerns, too. You may have seen in the Friday update a couple weeks ago that there was a little paragraph about someone who had come into the church on a Sunday morning, and we're not assuming that this person was meaning any harm. We quite frequently have some homeless people who come in. There's one gentleman who's been here many times. Sometimes people come in just looking for food or gift cards. But this person was spotted, and so the individual went and got someone else to help her. And by the time they came back, he had exited the building. But he came in and he had a backpack on, and that was the thing that kind of alerted her that there could be a potential problem. And it was at that point that we decided that we were going to take the extra step on a Sunday morning of locking the main entrance after the greeters are finished greeting, and only let the door at the ramp here open. And then we have one of our ushers that will either be in the stairwell or at this door right inside the window where they can see people who come in after that, making sure that it's people who should be here. So this building is, most of you know, very big. There's a lot of ways to get in and out of it. And there's, a lot of ways for persons to get in here that mean no harm. They just got lost from the other side of the building or whatnot. But we're just trying to take the precautions that we can. So the other one is we had put a note in the update also. When children leave the sanctuary, they really should be with a parent. Now, obviously, sending a school-age child down to the restroom is okay, and our ushers are prepared to, they kind of go out into the hall, they kind of watch, make sure the child comes back within a reasonable amount of time. But right now, we're only using 2 ushers per week, so, and one of them being at the door, so we don't have a lot of manpower to be watching children. But we've had issues with children who would leave the sanctuary and then go up to the fellowship hall and run around or through other parts of the church, and that really should not happen. So your parents, you need to be aware of where your children are if they're not in the sanctuary. And all of that just to say that we're not trying to be restrictive, but we're just trying to keep things as safe as possible. We wouldn't want children to get lost. And again, a child who's just kind of running around could go through a door that takes them to the other side of the building and then not know how to get back. So again, parents, just if your children are out of the sanctuary for longer than normal, you might want to go look for them and maybe even just sit down and talk with them ahead of time about the importance of just going where they need to go and then coming back.
Right, and I'm just going to wrap it up here with just a quick reminder of what our policy actually looks like physically. It's a piece. It's going to look about this if you look at it in paper form. And the first part of it are the definitions of abuse. The video talked about that a little bit, but they did not have one crucial part that the Pennsylvania law does add on to the definitions, and that is the trafficking. So that was not covered. So if you want to learn more about that, check out pages 4 through 7. Next slide. The next part of our policy talks about our specific preventions and safeguards. And the main things to learn from there in pages 8 to 14 are that our trusted adults are screened, and you are part of that, and you're trained. Also, we've talked about this. We just want to emphasize it again. The 2-person standard is what we go by. Next part of our policy is about the mandated reporting. The video talked a little bit about that. I just want to ask, who is a mandated reporter at James Street Mennonite Church? It's going to be all of us, everyone viewing this video now, and who will be viewing it later. If you are supervising a child under the age of 18 for any reason, whether you're an usher or working in children's ministry or youth ministry, you're going to be mandated to report in the manner that we learned in the video from Dove's Nest. And final part of our policy, the last 2 sections deal with our James Street specific response to any allegations that might occur. So you can read more about that, as well as how we will work with individuals who may have who do have a substantiated report. And what I want to say about that is that we are a welcoming congregation, so we don't turn people away. But when we have a situation like this, we're committed to careful grace. And so we can be assured that we'll all work together in that kind of circumstance. Well, it's heavy conversation that we have learned about tonight, so maybe you need to take a moment to have a deep breath. And if you have any questions, formulate them, and we have time for a few questions. If you are live streaming this right now, you can text a question to this phone right here is the number that you're seeing. So you can quickly do that if you want to. And are there any questions from the live audience? It says answers. I might not have answers, but I hope there are some questions. One thing that maybe you kind of thought about while we were watching the video, she mentioned local organizations that we would turn to if we ever got into a situation where there were allegations or persons coming to our congregation with substantiated allegations. The organization, if you were wondering, in our community that we would turn to is Safe Communities PA. Safe Communities PA is led by Linda Crockett, and she is available for us to ask questions at any time. And so we would turn there first. Secondly, we could turn to ACC, our conference, and that especially, the conference especially deals with any allegations from leadership. They have a clergy abuse task force that works on all of that. And we also could go to Dove's Nest, the makers of the video that we just watched, in case you were wondering. Yes?
Maybe you spoke to this already, and I was drifting, but if I suspect or I'm wondering about a possible abuse situation, do I come to one of the pastors to report that, or do I go, who does the actual reporting?
So the question is, who does the actual reporting if you're wondering if there's a situation? So there's two things I'm hearing there. One is if you're just wondering on your own based on observations, that you could probably come and talk to a pastor about. But if another situation is if someone has disclosed to you the disclosure verbally, and you ask those questions, what happened, who did it, when then you must first report to the state through the child line, and then after that come to me. That's a good question. You have to parse that out. Any others? Yes?
I understand that there's a roster in the GoBack,
Mm-hmm.
but as we know, many children are hit and miss. One time they're here, one time they're not. So I'm not sure how the roster could be helpful to me. Like if I have 10 children in the roster, but there are only 6 there, and I can't remember was so-and-so part of that 6 or not. So how, other than getting a new brain?
So the question is referring to the Go Bags, which are part of the emergency exit plan, and that they contain a roster with all the child's name. Yeah, I mean, yes, it is requiring that you would remember which ones out of your possible class are actually in attendance that day. We ask that at the beginning of class that attendance is taken so that at least there would be some kind of mental process that you would realize who was there. Yes, and getting a new brain is no. Hopefully you can work together as teacher and helper to remember who all is present on that day. But yes, I think one of the things you're alluding to is that in an actual emergency situation, our brains just do not function. There's a lot of grace for that. I am trusting that in such a situation, all of us as adults would work together to ensure the safety of each other.
I believe the kids would be helpful too, except the nursery, that they would be able to say, oh, so-and-so is here now.
There's a suggestion from the audience that the children themselves would be more helpful maybe than our adult brains in remembering each other's names in the class. And I think that's true. They'll know so-and-so is here, or that person didn't come to class today. So don't worry. Thanks, Anne. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about like a youth confiding to an adult something that happened not at church?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's abuse or something, or something that happened, or even self-harm. But if the youth says, "I'm going to tell you this, but it's a secret. Don't tell anybody. This is private."
Okay. The question is, can we talk a little bit more about when a youth discloses to a trusted adult a situation of abuse that did not happen at church, abuse or self-harm or etc. that we talked about? Yes, so my understanding is that yes, you'll need to report the abuse, whether it happened on church property or not, or was a church person or not. It's just a situation of abuse. That's reportable. Like Alicia mentioned, self-harm is not required to be reported, but should probably be talked about with a parent or a guardian or a pastor if that's what you prefer, and decide about how to go about that. If the youth, part of the question was if the youth asks for confidentiality. I think it's important for trusted adults to just make clear to children, to youth, that yes, we respect confidentiality, except when there's harm to self or others, then that's not confidential anymore. The question is about what phone number for reporting. The Childline phone number is actually posted in every classroom, so you can go there. I mean, so we're assuming, of course, that the disclosure happens in a classroom, but otherwise you can look it up very easily on your phone. There's probably a link if you just type in like reporting child abuse. It's Childline PA, so you want to be Pennsylvania specific for us. That's true. Yes. Someone live here is reminding us that yes, that you can report online. You don't have to actually make a phone call anymore. And in fact, if you're doing your clearances, one of your clearance, the child abuse clearance, comes through the same website. So you will have already created an account anyway. So your computer can store your password, and you can get in real quick and choose. If you're not choosing clearances, you can choose reporting, and then it'll run you through a process. So then you don't have to actually talk to anybody on the phone. These are all really great questions. Every year we get good questions. But no one's texting any questions. Are there any final questions live? Oh, great. Okay, well then it's time for signatures. All right. And if you are viewing live stream right now, please look for an email, the email that you sent to Kelly, or the one that you usually receive, church email. Check there for an email from DocuSign. It would have been sent between 6 o'clock and 6:30 this evening. And if you don't see it in your main email box, check your junk mail or your social or your promotional email. If you are attending or watching this video after August 31st, there will be instructions for you on the next PowerPoint slide. And everyone who's here, you are receiving a paper that has the year 2022-2023 on it. We're using the educational year, and this will be good for your training for this year. Can you go ahead and show the next slide? while everyone is signing here, I'll just say to those who are viewing this after August 31st, just email any questions to the email on the slide. And then after you've viewed after viewing this training, please answer those 3 questions plus anything else you want to tell us, and that you're answering those questions sent to my email address will constitute you saying, yes, I have done this training. So after that, after you've sent those, you'll receive a follow-up email with your own DocuSign document to be able to sign and verify that you've received the training. Thank you to everyone who is here, to everyone who viewed live stream, and to everyone who is viewing this even later. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being with us through a heavy kind of topic. And we're in this together as a congregation. We don't do this alone, not just of ourselves. We do this in the power of Christ. And it is Jesus who said, let the little children come to me and be like a child to enter the kingdom. That's our goal, and that's why we're doing what we're doing here tonight and for the rest of the year. Thank you.